So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 405, and let's just say that this chapter is going to be most likely very decisive in the fan base. Some of it is good, some of it is not so good, but it kind of makes sense within the story, and you'll get to see what I'm talking about, but first, right after this. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Andrew, and I'm here to do my review for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 405, titled Final Boss. Yes, we are finally reaching the final boss of the series, and I'm gonna be honest, the final boss in this chapter is actually going to surprise you, but when you learn who it is, it's not gonna be that surprising. But yes, for the most part when it comes to this chapter is going to be a very direct follow-up to what we got in the previous chapter, with Bakugo saving All Might and pretty much in a way altering his fate, and we're going to get a little bit more into that very soon. But let me just give my initial thoughts on this chapter, and I would say that I think that this is a very solid chapter. I think this chapter does have a lot of good in it when it comes to certain characters and their interactions and how certain characters are being put in their place, but there is a major stain potentially on this chapter that is going to be very decisive, and in my humble opinion is something that is actually detrimental to the story. And we'll be talking about all of that soon, so let's just get right into the review proper. And the chapter actually starts off with everyone literally being shocked at what happened with Bakugo saving All Might, as well as tying up the loose end of what happened with Night Eye's prediction, where in this chapter we get confirmation that the vestige or the individual that Night Eye is talking to and All Might in this moment, that pretty much what is happening is that this is the moment where All Might was supposed to die, and what Night Eye foreshadowed with his quirk. And how the confirmation is very interesting because it seems as if All Might believes that this Night Eye, and there is some interesting implications for what's going on in this moment. All Might believes that he is speaking to a sort of hallucination of All Might in this moment. And there's some interesting stuff that we may want to tackle in this moment. For instance, the idea that All Might thinks that he's talking to a hallucination of Night Eye. However, the conversation that they are having most likely in this moment seems to be from two different individuals and does not seem to be a more or less hallucination in the way that All Might thinks. I think what is happening is that in the world of My Hero Academia, and this is something that is actually tackled a little bit more earlier on in the series with what was happening with Shigaraki when he was in the moment of his death, as well as some information and some tie-in actually potentially to Vigilantes, where if you remember what happened or read Vigilantes, spoilers for that series, but towards the end of that series, we had 3 of the main characters going through a pseudo-death montage where each one of them were in a state of potentially dying, but yet during these moments of death, they were able to communicate with one another, not like a hallucination or not within Koichi's head, but that they were actually able to communicate with each other even though they are separate individuals because they were all in the state of death. And tying into what we saw with Tomoe Shigaraki during the war, during his death moment, he was able to communicate with his family that he killed, as well as All for One, but also he was able to communicate with Nanashima. And this is very important because if this was a hallucination, he would not be able to hear or know what Nana sounds like or really looks like within this world because he never properly met her. So I think that what this chapter is confirming in the world of My Academia is that there is a sort of afterlife and the dead can communicate with the living outside of the quirks themselves and outside of the vestige-like world. Which would be the explanation for how Night Eye was able to confirm to All Might in this moment that the villain that was going to kill him was All for One in this younger state. And how there is a little bit of meta contextuality with this, where All Might is coming to a realization that he is alive, as well as Night Eye confirming that what was happening was something that All Might was able to do, how he didn't keep his dream alive, but that he was able to keep his promise of twisting fate and allowing for the fate to be changed, changing his fate and being able to live past this moment where he was foreshadowed to die. And how we have the meta commentary of All Might coming to a realization that, oh, isn't it supposed to be like me dying as the mentor and passing all my ideals to the next generation? Which is very hilarious because that's exactly what happened with Night Eye. But I think that what makes this meta contextual idea work for me is the idea that while All Might is a mentor and he is breaking the conventions and the critique and the trope of him dying as a mentor, what's very interesting about this is that he's able to do it because he does the one thing that many people within fiction fail not to do. Instead of trying to change his fate or change the fate of others actively, such as with Night Eye trying to change All Might's fate as well as potentially changing his own death, he embraced it. He went through with it. He allowed fate to veer its course the way it was supposed to, and by doing so was going to inevitably change fate. Because that's a trope in storytelling, where people who try the hardest to try and defy fate eventually fall into it. And most likely those who go more towards what their fate is supposed to be are more likely to get out of it with a better conclusion because they aren't trying to fight against it, because fighting against it may make the situation worse. And that's going to tie very much heavily into All For One in this instance as well. But yeah, overall, what we're getting in this chapter is the conclusion to that plot line involving Night Eye and All Might, and most likely All Might is going to live past this war, but maybe not towards the end of the series. We're just going to have to wait and see. But yeah, going from All Might, let's talk a little bit more about Bakugo, who's taking up a large portion of what this chapter is, where we get a little bit more explanation for how he was able to revive himself, as well as where he's going to be going within this fight when it comes to fighting against the villains. Because we do get a little bit more reference to the idea that many people within the world of My Hero Academia does remember who Bakugo is because of his explosion quirk and remembering that he won in the sports festival and the fact that he was kidnapped by the League of Villains, as well as we get more confirmation of movie canon characters, specifically the two kids that we saw in My Hero Academia's second movie, where we get to see them all recognizing that this is Bakugo, as we have Bakugo chastising All Might, who's questioning if he is okay, to which I should be asking you that, that's my line, to which we have Edshot, who says actually that's my line, as he forces Bakugo to cough up more blood from his lung. And this is where we're approaching more of the controversial aspect of this chapter, because we get to see that Edshot has accomplished of achieving his goal, reviving Bakugo while also healing his wounds. And how we pretty much get Edshot on the ground in this very sort of very skinny, very thin state where it seems as if he's barely hanging on for dear life. And how we have Edshot pretty much confirming that he has used pretty much all of his body to repair the broken bones and injuries within inside of Bakugo in this moment. So yeah, this is a little bit more confirmation that potentially, if not straight up, Edshot is going to die. Because at this moment, what is left of him is what's remaining of his body, and we see that it's actually broken up and ripped apart from what was inside Bakugo. So, you know, if Edshot somehow survives this, yeah, people are going to have reasonings to pretty much question whether or not this makes sense within the story of My Hero Academia, which his survival in this state would not make sense. Which, if Edshot actually is able to survive this, I would be very much skeptical on how this is potentially going to affect the story, as well as other aspects of the story when it involves death. But from what we see in this chapter, it is more or less confirming that, yeah, Edshot is going to die. But that's not actually the controversial part of the chapter. What is actually controversial is the explanation for how Edshot was able to revive Bakugo. And this is where the issue comes in, because apparently from what we're getting in this chapter, Bakugo was actually revived from a sweat bubble that entered his heart, that exploded, and that is what restarted his heart. And the issue that I have with this is just with that small little idea that the explosion restarted his heart. Now, people are talking about the idea that, oh no, it's because Sweat was able to do it, but that's not actually the case. And here's the thing. We need to remember how Bakugo is able to create these explosions, which is through nitroglycerin sweat. And when it comes to how this sweat is being built up inside of Bakugo's body, from what we've seen with the chapter where his heart seems to exploded, what actually most likely happened is the sweat that we are told is building up throughout his body and is just finding for ways to come out may have actually gotten into his bloodstream by the fact of his quirk cluster explosion ability having the sweat beads build up in his body. And even though it's not necessarily that sweat can easily enter the bloodstream that way, sweat is still made of water, and water can perspirate through the blood vessels in the body, so there is some sense with how it actually entered the body. The issue is that the nitroglycerin seems to have exploded and restarted his heart. And even though actually scientifically nitroglycerin has been used and is being used to help with heart issues, those heart issues are more primarily not to restart the heart, but to actually help improve blood flow and mitigate the pain in the chest. What this explanation is equating itself to is seeming to be sort of like a defibrillator or CPR, which is not how neither of those works. You can't just have an explosion restart the heart. It may help with the flowing of the blood, but it's not going to get the heart pumping. And that shot explains that this is the accumulation of Bakugo's ability and training with his quirk. However, this is bordering on the line of believability and disbelief. I will accept it due to the fact that it is nitroglycerin, which does have properties that help with blood flow and heart issues. However, it is unable to actually restart the heart. But what makes it a little bit more palatable is the idea that Edgeshot has been this entire time trying to restart his heart while he was inside of Bakugo. So you could say that he's been trying to pump the blood and use the heart to help pump it more, and that the explosion gave it enough kick and enough blood flow to return blood to the brain and oxygen to the brain to allow him to wake up from this moment. Either way, it is iffy, and I can understand why people may have complaints with this revival method, but overall, it could have been significantly worse. But yeah, that's going a little bit more into the controversial aspect of the chapter, and now we're approaching more of the end of the chapter, where we get to see that Bakugo is realizing that, oh, that glowing child up there? Oh, that must be awful, and I didn't really notice, because, you know, I was saving you, and I actually just didn't notice. But then we get something that is very genuinely wholesome of All Might saying that, oh man, I can't really give you anything more than this, but it's broken, but it will act as a splint, as we get the name of this explosive device that he was going to use against All For One, which is the Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite. And how All Might is very much solemn of this being the last thing that he's able to give to Bakugo, but Bakugo has the warmest and most heart-wrenching smile we have ever seen him have in the series, and gosh darn it, is it not adorable? It is definitely adorable, and that is something that I never thought I would say about Bakugo. But yes, with this new splint on his arm, he's able to now go more on the offensive, and as the chapter begins to end, All For One begins to realize that, oh no, I can't deal with this anymore. I have to go after One For All. I have to get my little brother, which, once again, something that I've been noticing, he doesn't just go after One For All, he also specifies that One For All is his little brother. And hopefully that's going to play into something a little bit later on in the series about how he's not just going after One For All because of how powerful it is, but because it may be because it's the last remaining aspect of his little brother and he cares about his little brother. Just food for thought. But as he's thinking about this and how he needs to give this copy of his quirk to Tomura so that he can try and retake control of the body, he begins to reminisce about what's been going on with his fight with the heroes on top of the UA Flying Fortress, what happened with the heroes he was fighting against at Gunga Mountain, as well as what happened afterwards with All Might, Gigantomachia, all of these heroes doing their darndest to stop him as he's trying to understand, why is this happening? The wind is supposed to be blowing in my favor, as you just have Bakugo chiming in saying that he is the final boss, All For One, and sends a giant explosion, sending All For One creaming into the ground as All For One remembers the second user of One For All's face, as the chapter ends with Bakugo declaring that, yeah, when it comes to that dang nerd, I'll pick up what he can't do on his own. Chapter ends. And once again, the reasoning why everything isn't going the way of All For One is because he's been trying to fight against fate. Instead of putting his fate in the hands of Tomura Shigaraki, he's trying to do everything on his own, very similar to what Deku has been doing, and is trying to accomplish his goals and his beliefs without considering what he could be doing and helping when it comes to the other characters, specifically Tomura Shigaraki. So yeah, the reasoning why everything isn't going your way is because you keep on trying to fight against fate, and eventually it's going to bite you in the butt, as it is in this chapter, potentially leading to the defeat of All For One himself. But yeah, this was a very solid chapter. I think that there are obviously some issues when it comes to how Bakugo's revival was explained, and how, depending on who you are, you may like it, you may dislike it. Very much at this moment, I am very much neutral on it, but I can say that I'm leaning more on a negative aspect of it than I am on the positive one, but everything else I pretty much enjoyed. I like the idea that we're finally tying up the loose ends, that this was something that potentially Horikoshi has been setting up for a long while when it comes to All Might's death, and how he definitely knew the idea that killing off the mentor is a trope and is very much cliche when it comes to shonen and just action in general, but that he still twisted in a way, and in a way you could consider this a deconstruction of it, and whether or not you like it or not is very much up to your own preferences. But me personally, I do like it like this. I still think that he's potentially going to die at the end of the series, but that he's not going to be doing it in a way where he's giving up his life necessarily for the benefit of his students, but just because he did the act of a hero, and just sometimes heroes are unable to live past these very traumatic and potentially fatal injuries. So I think that he's potentially going to live, just not into the near future. As well as I really liked Bakugo being considered the final boss, and how we're potentially setting up All For One versus Bakugo, or should I say Explosion Murder God Dynamite himself, which once again, it's that smile, very wholesome. Horikoshi has made me like Bakugo's smile for the first time ever. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, what's going to be happening within the next few chapters? Most likely we're going to be getting a fight, not just between Deku and Tomura, but also Bakugo and All For One. We're going to see the full extent of Bakugo's fighting against All For One, as well as how he's potentially going to be able to whip out potentially some new moves and force All For One in a corner where Bakugo is going to be the one to defeat him, as well as potentially getting more of Tomura Shigaraki versus Deku, and actually getting a little bit more into that fight. But yeah, that's all I really have to say on the topic for right now. And let me ask you this: what did you think of the chapter? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? And how are you when it comes to the revival of Bakugo and its explanation in this chapter? Leave your thoughts down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!